Hi, this is Donna. Welcome to DD Paper Crafts. Today's project is a number 2 shaped box. The box is 4.5 inches across, 7 inches high, and I have my opening at the top here. We're going to start by making the template for the front and back panels. Your paper will be 4.5 by 7.5. Alternatively, if you think it's a project you might make again and again, you might want to make the template out of some cardstock, cereal packaging, something like that. We'll start with the short side and we'll draw a line from top to the bottom at 1.5 inches, 2.25 inches, and 3 inches. On the long side, we'll draw from top to bottom at 1.5 inches, 3.75 inches, 4.5 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches, and 6.75 inches. And we'll then follow the red line as I have here to create your number 2. So between 1.5 and number 3, from the 3-inch line down to the end of the 6.75, down to the end of the 3.75, diagonally across in line with the 1.5 and the 2.25, across to the outer edge of the cardstock, down along the bottom, up to the 1.5, diagonally across where the 4.5 line intersects with the 3-inch line, up to the 6-inch line, across to the 1.5-inch line, down to the 5-inch line, across to the outer edge of the cardstock, up to the 6.75-inch line, and then to the 1.5-inch line. Cut that out. If you like the shape of the 2, I've effectively used full eighths, as it were, rather than 16ths. So you could easily scale this up or down by doubling or halving the measurements. So for instance, cut it from a piece which is 9 times 15, so a piece of A3 cardstock, and you would draw your lines, for instance, along the top at 3 and 6. So it's not going to be too difficult to scale up the box. Once you've got your outline marked, you'll cut that out, and that will give you this piece, and then you'll draw around the template onto your base cardstock to give you your front and back panels. A couple of things just to point out. Do check that your measurements along each of the edges are the same as the measurements that I'm using. You can see those marked clearly on the piece, because the strips that I'm going to give you for the outside edges are based on the measurements that I've used, as you can see on this template. So just double check that your measurements are the same. If they're not, then just adjust the length of your strips accordingly to match your template. And bear in mind, if you're going to use single-sided cardstock, your first number 2 will be cut face up, and then for your second number 2, you'll need to flip the number 2 over so that the 2 outer edges are on the outer side of the box. So we'll now cut the strips. You can, of course, change up the width of your box. My box is going to be 2 inches wide, so each strip is actually 3 inches wide. I'll have a 1/2 inch glue tab, the width of the box, and then a 1/2 inch glue tab. I've chosen to put my opening at the top, but you may choose to have your opening in the bottom. And as we go along, I'll show you what you could do and how you can adjust your strips to move your opening where you need it. And in addition, if you don't want to cut your strips from longer pieces and manipulate longer pieces, you might have a pile of scraps or offcuts of card in the cardstock you want to use, and you could cut each element individually. So for instance, this side here, I would cut from a piece which was the width I needed, so 3 inches for example, and then this piece would be 1.75 plus 1/2 inch. So I would have a piece which was 2.25 inches long, and I would score that at 1/2 inch, and that could wrap around this side and the bottom section like so. And then my next piece would be 2 inches long, which I would score at 1.5 inches, and I could just work my way around the template, cutting each section individually. So that's something to bear in mind. We'll start with our first strip, strip A, and this is going to run around all the areas which are marked in red. I'll put these measurements at the top for each strip so you can see these. So strip A is 3 inches wide and we'll score at 1/2 inch and 2.5 inches. This piece is 7 3/4 inches long and we're going to score at 1 3/4, 3 1/4, 4 1/4, 5 3/4, and 7 1/4. Strip B, that runs around all of the purple sections. This is 10 3/4 inches long and again 3 inches wide, which you'll score at 1/2 and 2.5, and you'll do that for all the strips. This will be scored along the long side at 4 1/4, 5 3/4, and 10 1/4. Piece C is the orange section. Again, this is going to be 3 inches wide. This is 10.5 inches long and will be scored at 1.5, 3 3/4, 7, and 10. And finally, strip D, which is the top section, including the opening. This is 5 1/4 inches long, scored at 1 5/8, 3 1/8, and 4 3/4. So that's going to give the 4 strips to run and join with the opening where I've put it. I'll just leave this on the screen here for a second. We'll treat all 4 strips the same. Fold and burnish along all of the score lines. And you may want to, as you're burnishing your piece, burnish the score lines in the direction that they're going to run around in the cardstock. Alternatively, burnish them in both directions. So here, the first score line is a valley fold, the second score line is a valley fold, then you'll have 2 mounting folds, and then your glue tab. So you can see how that's going to fit around there. So you might want to manipulate the score lines into the right orientation as you work around the pieces. On all 4 pieces, we're going to cut up each of the score lines within the 1/2 inch glue tab, and then we'll take a wedge from the ends of each of these tabs, and that will be the same on all 4 pieces. And then on the end of each piece where you have a glue tab, we're going to just cut a wedge into that glue tab and remove the bottom corners, as you can see here. In addition, in piece A, you may want to add a finger notch into this end like so. And in piece D, which is for the opening, in addition to cutting the glue tabs, I'm going to cut straight up the end glue tab because this is the tab that's going to run inside the box. And then because it's my personal preference, I'm going to round off the edges of this tab. And for the end section only, for the lid, I'm just going to cut a wedge, but cut it slightly shallower, just to help that fit into the box neatly. Once your pieces are all ready, it will just be a case of working your way around. I'm going to use quick grab glue for this section. We'll start with piece A and the front edge here. Take your time to get your pieces lined up all the way round. So you can see it's quite easy to manipulate the piece, and you can see that fits in there nicely. Once you get to the end of your strip, take your next strip, add glue to the glue tab and join the 2 pieces together. So the next piece is always going to be a flat edge and will always end with a glue tab. So that will just help you get your pieces the right way around. Once that's joined together, we can continue working our way round all of the strips. When you get to the last piece, section D, I'm going to add that on using the glue tab. And in the same way, I'm going to add this into the piece. We're only going to be gluing 2 sections. The last section will remain unglued, and that is our lid. So that's on, and that side is done. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can change where you have the opening. For example, if you wanted to have the opening here, think about whether you want the flap to open from the top down to the bottom or from the bottom up to the top. And then you might, for instance, cut part B just as one 4¼ inch strip. And then the rest of strip B would be 1½ plus the 4½ plus the half, plus an extra half at this end to create your little flap to sit inside the box. So this strip would be 7 inches long, scored at ½ inch, 2 and 6½, and that will give you a flap which would open outwards in this direction. You can, of course, change the flap as if it were to open in the other direction, so your piece would be 6¼ scored at 4¼ and then 5¾ and then the remainder would be 5 inches long. And you can also adjust the measurements on section C to change the opening to that side. There are ways you can change the box up. Now that side is finished, we'll take our second number 2. Before we stick this in place, I'm going to work my way around the box, and where the glue tabs fold over one another, I'm just going to glue those down, which is going to help the number 2 stay in shape as we stick the back panel in place. So make sure you don't stick this top piece here, that's our opening section. And once that's in shape, you can add your second panel on. I'm using my quick grab glue, but you may find it easier to add maybe your construction glue on the tabs all the way round, except the opening tab, and stick your piece in one go, and then just because you've cut the extra wiggle room with the construction glue, you can make sure that it sits in line with the outside edges. I would recommend that you move your opening section completely out of the way as I've done here, so that there's no chance of you sticking that down. So there's our box. I'll give you the measurements for the matte layer. This is cut from a piece of 4¼ by 7¼ and I've allowed a 1/8 of an inch gap all the way round the border. Along the short side, you'll mark from top to bottom at 1¼ 1 5/8, 1 7/8, 2 7/8, and 3. Along the long side, you'll mark at 1 1/4, 3 5/8, 4 1/4, 5, 6, and 6½. Along the top edge, we've got the 2 pencil lines which are close together, and these 2 which are close together. Your top edge of the number is going to run from the inside pencil marks out to the edge, as you can see, and the same on this side. You'll then come down to the 3 5/8 diagonally across where the 1 1/4 inch line intersects with the 1 7/8. Go back to the outer edge, down, along the bottom, back up to the 1 1/4, then diagonally up to where the 4 1/4 intersects with the 3 inch line. So we're going to use the outer pencil line, up to the 6 inch line, all the way across to the 1 1/4 inch line, down to the 5 inch line, and then across to the outer edge of the cardstock. So that will give you your matte layer template. When you've cut that out, I would recommend you lay it on your outside box. Just make sure that you're happy with the shape of how the matte layer sits on the outer box before you cut it out of your pattern paper. Particularly when we're working on diagonals, it can sometimes be a bit tricky to work out the measurements and get the look that you want. So now's your opportunity to change up the look of the template before you cut it out of your pattern paper. I'll just bring in the finished box. I'm really happy with how this one's come out. I need to add a few final bits of decoration once this Nuvo Drop Spider's Web has dried. Hopefully it's evident I'm going for a Spider-Man theme with this one. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please hit the thumbs up button. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.